Okay. So here we go without further ado, and feel free to jump in, especially because this is so small, we can make this work to have a conversation. But basically these are preliminary results on the survey that was done, over the last month and a half. Those of you who don't know, I have a doctorate in psychology. I built a conflict resiliency framework called the Deepen, Orient, Transform model. And that is how I fell down the rabbit hole, for better or worse, of virtual reality. I like to explain to people how I frame and how I grow in my, in what I offer in the world and my passions. And so I tell a lot of stories, if you don't know already. I really take in the qualitative aspects of what I'm learning. I'm iterative. So what you see over to the right is a picture of being in world and horizon, building graphs and charts and different concepts. And this was a concept I really fell in love with, this idea of liminal spaces as a future of how we are going to be as organizations, and the different mind states that bring about a liminal organization, this pluriverse that we're moving into with virtual reality. And then ethnographic, like I really immerse myself in the living stories of virtual reality and human dynamics to be able to share what I know. That makes it very subjective, but because the iterative piece, we all keep telling better stories together. As you all know, VR communities have been growing rapidly. They're not just for gaming. There's education, there's professional development, there's activism. And I think about VR communities as a merging of physical reality models of communities and online communities. And to date, I have not found any books or any huge pieces of thorough work that explain how to apply the most important concepts from both of those realms to virtual reality community building. So that's partly what I'm doing with Bridgemakers, is writing about this. And so these are some of the unique challenges I think that VR leaders, and I count everybody present in some capacity as a leader. So emotional intensity is, like, in a really positive way, it can be amazing, but it also complicates conflict management. There's identity fluidity. So because we can change our environments and our avatars and our names, that does affect how we see and listen and believe each other as human beings that are worthy of respect and investment. The technological complexity that, just like we saw today, even when I finally got the PowerPoint to work, I found out recently that, like, there's more users in VR chat from Oculus than from the other devices. So this would have been a problem for the majority of the users in VR chat if I'd been doing a presentation to 100,000 people. So sorry that fell on you, Molly, but this is just such a good example of how hard it is to keep offering things in so many changes. Cross-platform interactions, right? So like VR chat and multiple like Horizon worlds, they're opening up to mobile. So people are going to be on their phones, maybe playing Candy Crush while they're in worlds or listening to presentations or whatever. So like there's going to be a lot of variety in what it means to be present, even though VR is an immersive reality. Can anyone think of any other unique challenges of VR leadership? I heard someone.
You talked about the software of it. There's hardware concerns.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Yeah.
In VR chat.
There's a lot.
Yeah, there's a lot. Depends on what detail we want to go with it.
Yeah. Yeah. Does it fall outside of these main domains, or it's just getting into the details of what that actually looks like?
Details, I'd say.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's part of what Bridgemakers is about, this is very high level up in the air. And this is about going deeper into what do we do about it? And what are the its? What are the actual things? So this presentation today is going to be very high level. There's a now 70-page report, that goes into much greater detail that will probably be released, sometime next week. just getting core advisors and leadership to make sure they're signing off on it before I release it. But we're just going to...
It's a little bit of light reading.
Yeah, just a little bit, right? But basically, it's going to... What we're doing here is you're basically getting to see the outline of what this report is going to look like, and then you're going to be able to dive in a lot deeper, and maybe I can answer some questions today. So, key leadership roles in VR communities. This is how I'm separated out according to the experiences that I've had in multiple social VR apps, looking at different trends. And as you can see, community leaders are in that center point, but I also see them in a way like encompassing all of these roles. So they're also kind of like on top on this graph, because community leaders do community building, they do moderating, they do sometimes world building or avatar building, content creation. Like they do all of it, especially the smaller the community. But starting to parse out some of these roles and functions can help us understand what are the greatest deficits for the people who are responding to the survey at least. Overview, up to last Sunday, now we have about 65 VR community leaders, but I haven't analyzed the extra 10 we got. 55 VR community leaders who qualified as one or more of those roles. The goal of this survey was to understand experiences and challenges. Many people here did fill it out. Thank you. And this was direct outreach and word of mouth. More details there. It's a Google form, and we were targeting community builders, community leaders. So this was quantitative and qualitative. And the rankings on challenges, but also asking some open-ended responses to see if I was missing pieces. And this is a small group. Like if you think about 100,000 people in VR chat, that's a lot of communities. So there are limitations to this. It's not representative of all community leaders. It's also a massive range as far as like how big the communities are that these leaders are doing. I didn't survey how long leaders have been leading in their different roles. So this was a very early and I would say mediocre level survey in understanding some of these pieces. But the intention of it was more as an early engagement tool to kind of help people start thinking about these different domains. And so many great conversations have already been born from the survey. So I think in that respect, it has been successful. In typical psychometrics of measurements, it's not the most pristine survey, so it will improve that way. But I'm very happy with how many people stepped up and are really asking good questions at this point. So the main communities who had leaders within them that stepped up, and these are some of the different roles that they each hold. Any of these stand out for anybody here?
I recognize Ancients of VR there.
Same.
I only recognize one.
You only recognize one? What was the other comment before that?
I see Contain.
Yeah, I see Contain. Nice. Yeah, so one of the things to also understand is, to my knowledge, this is the only community leadership survey that has ever had engagement from multiple community managers of social VR apps. Some of them are listed here, some of them are not. But that is really striking to me because that has always been my goal, is to help community managers understand their community leadership and help communities understand their responsibility and opportunity to bridge with community management and how to do that. It can be a very frustrating experience when there's only one community manager many times in these social apps and hundreds of thousands of users. So BridgeMakers, oh yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, I just wanted to kind of make an observation.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of crossover. Like in these different types of communities you've listed, you'll see regular events, pop-up events.
Yeah.
Those, among other things, they seem to happen across the board, like in a lot of, not all of them, but quite a few of them.
Exactly. And so there's all kinds of like golden nuggets is what I call them, these trends. And I definitely want more of those kinds of observations from many people, because that will help us digest and figure out what is useful for us to look at. It is a good deal of data that we got, especially with the subjective responses. Key insights from survey with a reverse ranking. So if you remember, for those of you who took it, the survey was, in order of importance. 1 is number 1 important, and 5 is least important. Rate the importance of these different domains. And so what I did is I reverse scored it so we could look at importance levels. And world building was the lowest. That's not surprising to me, because there wasn't that many people who endorsed being world builders. So that might not be accurate to the priorities of the community versus just like, what is the community leader focusing on or most hungry? Moderation was next. And that was a little bit surprising, because I was expecting, because community leadership in VR is presence-based, moderation would be a more complicated subject. And I was expecting that to be probably the highest, but it was not. So then content creation was next, which makes sense. I thought that would be pretty high on the list also. If there are comments happening anywhere, if somebody can keep an eye on those, I'm not able to see comments because I'm watching the presentation in full screen on my laptop. We're rolling with this. Okay. So just let me know if there's something I need to attend to. Okay. And then we've got onboarding and retention. So that was kind of also interesting to me. I kind of imagined that VR community leaders would be less worried about the onboarding part, and I need to parse out more if it's in the area of retention, of like, how do we keep people? Because even last week at our roundtable, somebody was saying they grew a community of 65,000 people, and then everybody just disappeared. And it was like, wait, why did they leave? How do I keep that from happening? And then engagement strategies, like how are we being consistent with what we're telling our communities? These were the top, more specific community challenges that were listed. Scheduling, events, technology, addictions, mental health, accessibility. So that was kind of interesting. And more on this soon. So this week we did our first community leadership meetup, where we went over a special challenging hard topic for the first hour on Friday. We talked about community debt, which was started in the discussion earlier this week. It was really rich discussion, and how that shows up for leaders. Does anybody remember what community debt is, for those of you who've read or are simultaneously scanning the Discord and catching up? So community debt is where a discrepancy grows between the community's needs and what the product is offering. And so basically it starts to kind of make, if you imagine a community as a forest, it can make the forest very brittle and be very vulnerable to scandals, drama, burnout, because, well, some needs are getting met, which is what attracted the community to that product or, whatever is being offered. Other needs are not getting met, and people start to group up on those unmet needs. And so these are all topics that rarely get brought up with community leaders, especially in a group, to talk about, like, how do we do these things? Because many community leaders are already pretty burned out and pretty wary of getting more involved in harder things when we've got so much cancel culture swirling around. So these are some of the pieces that we're going to start to kind of jump into and just learn from each other. What are the perspectives we hold as members of this VR community, but also as potential leaders in our own right? Any thoughts or comments on this one before I keep going?
Seems reasonable.
Seems reasonable? Okay, good. I will tell you, there's always, one that I'm looking forward to the least. And I'm glad we have bridge makers, but I will tell you the least interesting one on this list for me, just because it's such a sticky, what is it called, wicked problem, is the children piece, is how do we get along with children. I believe there has to be some answers there, including just how to have really healthy boundaries with children and set that up in the community. But in VR, this is just kind of like unpinning a grenade just to bring up children at all. So, that's...
I agree with that as well.
You mentioned that there's anyone under 18 in the VR space and everyone will jump at once.
Yeah, it's like something exploded. That's right.
But it's something that happens. You
All
can't
the time.
acknowledge it.
Right.
If you don't acknowledge it, you can't disregard it.
Yeah. And so one of the special topic areas in the report actually is addressing how do we set boundaries. A lot of times smaller communities are going to have a harder time doing anything healthy or safe around including children in a healthy way. And so for the majority of the community leaders connected to bridge makers, my recommendation will be no children, because there's not enough protections in place for that to go well at all. But I think that as communities grow clearer about their values and how they can set healthy bridges and boundaries, more children might be included over time. It's just smaller ones are going to have a harder time setting up the structure to do that in a healthy way. So mostly we're going to cover these others, but that will be one of the topics that we at least tiptoe into a little bit to hear perspectives and start to gather, what is a good example of a adulting community that has any allowance of children involvement and it doesn't go back to bite them eventually. And I don't know, but we'll start to think about that a little bit. But the other ones are the ones I have a lot more, up nights worrying and also research and subject matter experts on. And so we will look into these more directly. Okay, so that, I'm going to switch back to that for a second. So the report is to build basically like an overall frame of what the community is most interested in learning about. But as you know, there wasn't a forced choice, which was pointed out by a couple of people. And I did that on purpose. But what it does is it renders more specific results into a very blurry category, because some people, when they were given 5 different categories, they selected the most important ones were 4 of those 5, and other people stuck to what it looked like the rule would be, but it wasn't a forced rule. So what I still can do with that data is I can offer individualized reports and plans for people on what they're wanting to learn about and prioritize resources according to how they're contributing also with this community. So more on that in a little bit. But before that, I'm going to show you what's cooking basically with bridge makers. And this is it's kind of like a third draft that has evolved through many different communities that I've been involved in and built over time. This is subject to change. This is something, even if this is best practices that I've seen, doesn't mean that's going to completely fit with this group. So this is the best I've come up with so far, and we're gonna make this better. But basically, you can see that the first step on the bottom here, we're going to go through each of these, is you come in as a human being or a newbie, and then the next step is becoming a builder, which is joining and getting more active as a helper and a member. And then the leaders in training is what you see there, PLITs. And that is potential leader in training, where you're actually vying for candidacy. And then leader in training, to make that very simple, basically that means that leaders in training get the most attention and support from me and the core leader team who is helping with bridge makers. As far as like really nurturing and upskilling them so they can scale in a sustainable way, if that's their goals or whatever their goals are. And then collaborator is where leaders in training are starting to actually train and mentor other leaders. And eventually, if they stick around long enough, that turns into core leadership, which is in the design category. helping shape the future of Bridgemakers, and eventually becoming an advisor and having specialized enough to be qualified as a subject matter expert. So we'll look at these a little bit more right now, but in general, that's the path. You might have seen in the Discord, there's a group called Human on Purpose. This is kind of that human level of learning how to synchronize with our bodies and our emotions. It's not a requirement at all, but it is an invitation for anybody and everybody who wants to learn how to lead themselves, especially with uncomfortable emotions and places inside of them, to come and practice. This is not a therapy group. It's a self-awareness and empathy building group, basically. So we're learning emotional fluency. How do we identify emotions from our bodies and from the environments around us and from each other, and use that as a communication tool to work through conflict at times? And we are having conflict. So it's good that we're doing this. And this is twice a week. But this isn't the only way. The other way to be human in the Discord is just to emoji things. If you read something in our Discord, give it an emoji. And that's a way to contribute and not only be watching and learning, but knowing that your presence as leaders and as people in this community matters, and your silence also has an impact. So any kind of emoji is at least letting us know there's a heartbeat. And this is a place to recharge. Many of us have different gradients of burnout in what we're doing in our lives, and we're here to practice being authentic, genuine, and courageous community. So then level 1 is where there's actually some effort going in. And so you saw on the path earlier, this is where we are leaning into actually building community. So first part of level 1 is just becoming a helper. And that's contributing in some way to this community, whether it's creative content or videography or just being a greeter and starting and commenting on discussions. There's all kinds of little and big ways you can be a helper. This will give you access to some of these training modules that the leaders in trainings are going through, and be able to come to some of the more exclusive events. And then level 2 is collaborating. This is where it's not just about developing yourself as a leader, it's about developing with other leaders and learning how to bridge with them. And so this is where you can start to do some mentoring or get mentorship and taking on some more strategic roles where you're leading some helping projects, etc. So this is, again, when the potential leaders leaders in training are applying for their candidacy. And then we have designing. And this is for leaders who are advanced and wanting to actually steer the beautiful ship that doesn't actually sink called Bridgemakers. As this gets built, and we're all building this together, unique resources, mentorship, and other opportunities for growth. So going back to that graph we saw earlier, if we're applying this path to these key areas of focus, this is where if you wanted to jump in and say, okay, engagement is really a concern and a need for most of the leaders in here, how can I be a helper and build best practices for engagement? And can I offer mentorship for that? Can I offer a project that everybody could get involved in, really tackle that? Hopefully the dings stop coming. So any questions or thoughts about this one before we keep going? This is where we're going to close up and open up for Q&A, because I know I've just thrown a lot at everybody here. So building in the future, everybody's building the future. I don't want to make Bridgemakers super special that way. But what you do have here that you probably have never had as a VR community leader is you have access through this path to a team of subject matter experts that are really extraordinary. These are people that I've been building relationships with for the last 4 to 5 years, if not longer. And they are really excellent professionals within the VR space at every level. And so joining this path is a way to not just upskill yourself, but it's also a way to contribute to other people who maybe have suffered some of the leadership pitfalls that you've been going through that you didn't even have words to explain or know that there were any resources to help. So as far as I know, this is a very innovative thing that has never quite gotten to this point where we don't just have, moderators that we're focusing on. We're focusing on all the different levels of providing direction and leadership in the community, including all the way up to the developer level and community management. So as we gather this wisdom together, this collective wisdom, it affects all the different tiers of power. And that could really build some new and innovative communities, in my opinion. Okay, so survey report is planned to be posted next Sunday, and this is the invitation. If you would like to become a helper and explore the helper roles in the Discord, I will offer you a customized report, which normally after this will be offered for basically leaders, potential leaders in training candidates will get these reports as part of their application. But because this is the first round, you too, before you've even become a helper, could get this customized report. So please review that list of helper options. And if you see something or you have an ability to do something for Bridgemakers that isn't on that list, or you just want to help with the helpers list, because some people have mentioned it's confusing, but they haven't offered specifics. So that's a 1.0 list based off of a lot of different other experiences. But if you have better names or better way to organize it, and be a macro level helper, you are welcome to jump in and collaborate with us. And so what you'll get in that customized report is the challenges that you've expressed and how that compares to your peers. You'll get some growth edge recommendations. What are the areas that you, in whatever kind of leadership you're offering, may be struggling with? And you would see signs of that in how conflict happens in your communities, or how people show up in spaces or communicate, or how they disappear. And then a development plan on where you can improve whenever you want to do that. And then resources and options, if we have them, or plans to build them. So with that in mind, that's going to get into the weeds. I actually decided to skip that one. So with that in mind, this is where we can open it up to Q&A. Thank you everybody who joined in here. What are reflections, feedback, or questions?
The odd silence.
Oh,
right. You mean?
Say that again.
I'll have a question.
Yeah.
With your research and your findings so far, how would I word this? For instance, the moderation processes that I have in my groups and communities, is it, in your eyes, an effective way to go about it, or is there some things that you suggest that we might try out in terms of how we go about things?
Yeah, thank you for that question, Azuki. One of the things I appreciate about your United Moderation Group is that you're coordinating across different instances and even different communities at times. Is that right?
Correct, yes.
Yeah.
We try and involve as many other worlds and communities as
Right.
possible, just to share information and tips on how to deal with situations.
Yeah, exactly. And so one of the things we will be diving into here, which is partly how I met some of you, including you, Azuki, is what are the findings from the Troll Project, where I interviewed all kinds of trolls, career level trolls that are monetizing off their trolling, all the way down to the people who literally put on a headset with the goal to come and troll, and they ran into me first, much to their shock and surprise. And then I started to quiz them deeply on why they are trolling, and hopefully they had an aha moment on what they were actually about to do. And so what I have recognized, not just for VR communities, but also online communities, is that they have inherited a frame of punitive justice, which is basically like, we set a boundary for you, you messed up, therefore you have to be on the outside of that boundary. And that's not wrong, but it's very crude. And what it reflects is our bigger justice system that doesn't know how to actually do more reparative frames, which is the next level of justice. But it takes a lot more effort and strategy and processes to be put in place where there can be reconciliation cycles for somebody who has messed up. Now, for everybody here who, I'm just scanning what I'm seeing here. Yeah, I don't think any of you, well, actually, that's not true. Most of you here are not monetized as far as like making any income for what you're doing in your leadership. And so for especially the people who are not monetized, like the fact is you've figured out whatever recipe you have figured out to grow a welcoming space for some people. Trying to make it inclusive and reparative for everybody who is invading your space is burnout territory. But there are little ways to reduce the risk of turning trolls into bullies who are going to bully your community. There are methods to do that and to grow awareness with your moderators on how to de-escalate situations and offer a gradient of boundaries so it doesn't become a vendetta kind of scenario. And so specifically for your community, Azuki, I would love to offer you a consultation to give you some tips on that then if it feels right, if there's ones that you want, you can share some of those recommendations in the community and see what other people think and how they might have implemented some of these strategies. And then it's really still going to be up to everybody present to like test these out in their communities and their events and see if they are scalable or how they can be scaled. Because it's one thing to, have a kumbaya 10-person fire setting that you can, say to the one troll that happens in there, no, you need to leave, versus having a steady stream of trolling, which I think your community definitely does, like at a whole other level. So you're going to be partly the expert on trying out these mini interventions with small group of interested moderators. And
we've tried different avenues, including like systems of restorative justice and sort of like allowing people to like giving them many chances and looking at why they've come into our community to do this sort of stuff.
Yeah.
And so like the deeper like levels of are they coming in because they want to, in some instances, like get some sort of like notoriety for being a troll in the community, or are they doing it because of a misconception of individuals within that community? And that's sort of like
right. Yeah.
Yeah.
That diagnosing is important, but it can become very black and white in the ideas of what their motivations are. So this is not going to be a one-time topic. This is going to be an ever-growing topic that we're going to be going into details of like, how do we use the environments we've built to do these interventions? And actually, one of the techniques to work with trolling that doesn't have to initially be a block or ban is a type of fatiguing process where the community gets more responsible for the space and the trolls experience increasing unpleasantness when they're trolling that doesn't have to be attacking them or returning their tactics back. And again, this is a gradient of solutions that don't even always apply every time, but can be tried. And just the act of trying this in the communities that have started to implement some of these more restorative justice or transformative justice frames will prevent some of the burnout that happens in community leadership. So that's the goal. But how that scales for your community is something I hope we can experiment with in a way that does, feels like a healthy risks to be taking instead of terrifying. Thank you for the question, Azuki. I'm excited. Hopefully you and I can work together on finding some answers. Yeah.
That's fine. I'm happy to trial things. I'm always poking the stick at things just to see if it will work.
Yeah.
In a way.
Yeah.
You poke the stick in quite many ways,
Yeah.
Azuki, sometimes.
And to reflect you
in
back
so many different ways.
to you, Azuki, one of the things that I ask at the end of different interviews I've done with stakeholders around trolling is I've said, what if a troll lives under a bridge, what's on the other side of the bridge? And Azuki had one of the best responses I've ever heard, which was, the thing that is on the other side of the bridge is the thing that we are avoiding what's under the bridge to get to. So like we built the bridge to avoid what's underneath it. And I think there's some wisdom in that. And then you said something to the effect of it's how we get to where we're going that matters more. And so Bridgemakers is in that spirit. How do we get there together better? Yeah. So we have about 15 more minutes for questions and answers that we're all collaborating on. I'm curious for the people who weren't in the beginning of our tech troubleshooting, what you've learned and what you're noticing.
Don't be shy, come on.
You didn't get to hear the really fun intros we did in World with each other. So, yeah, but it's lovely to see you, Raingram and Riley and Catman, Faye, and Ender. So good. So good to have you here.
I think one of the more broader discussions that would have to happen is sort of around the idea of the underage and minor individuals that come into certain communities, because that itself is very multifaceted and sort of
yeah,
there's multiple ways to handle that sort of stuff, because there's the idea of allowing these individuals into certain spaces and where that boundary is of where you just can't allow them.
Exactly.
But because of the space VR is, there are people from multiple ages, including you kind of have to treat it like you would treating someone a different background, some this sort of way. You can only exclude to a certain point.
Yeah, that's it. And ultimately, there's this idea of being careful with the trolls, because the trolls can become the villains and bullies that really go after our communities. But there's also being careful with the children, because they are the potential super trolls of the future. And and how we set boundaries with them may come back on us as an entire community. So there's this collective worry, I think, in all of us of how do we use this immersive space to recuperate from our lives and find communion with people who are like us and the people we choose to be connected to, while also acknowledging that there's an increasing need by people under 18 to find that village also. And and figuring out how to do that, not from a place of guilt, but from a place of resilience. Maybe Bridgemakers only begins to solve how to set healthy, assertive, and not cruel boundaries with children for the first year or two that we're growing. We just get really good at advertising. This is how to set the boundaries. These are the things to say. These are the things not to say. I've seen a lot of community leaders over the years with children who will actually bully children out of this desperation to kind of tell them you had such a bad experience. Tell all the other children, don't come back here. But that doesn't really work, because they're not just not connected with us. They're not connected with each other in any way that's usually very useful. So finding ways to teach children from the cognitive level that they can comprehend why the spaces that they're coming into are not good for them is a question. We have so many different, thousands and thousands of worlds in VR. How many worlds have ever been created to actually educate anybody, much less children, on the dangers of their virtual reality village that they're trying to build and how to navigate those in a safe way? How do we start to harness? Exactly. And that means that we start here right now in this conversation, starting to understand, what do we know? What are the missing pieces? And how do we start to pool these resources together to have recommendations on best practices and language that actually works for these developmental levels? Then you get into yeah. I was going to say.
Sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, delay. No, you go on.
I was going to say
had a little bit of delay there.
That's it. You get into the complexity then of developmental levels that we're all acting in, depending on how sleep deprived we are, if people are using substances, if we're in worlds that bring out those inner kids in us. That also adds another layer of complexity on how to communicate with people who are kind of in an altered mind state. And as leaders who are hosting events or whatever else, we may feel very clear and explicit about what boundaries we're setting, but that might not be the language that they need to hear to actually help them shift their behavior in a way that doesn't create a trauma and a reactive response off of that. So, this is especially around children, it's a wicked problem, and it's called that because it's not going to be solved by any one source. It's going to be an evolution. But those present who are willing to start to ask the hard questions and see if there's any new answers is how that's going to shift over time. But again, I have to say that as far as children go, that's kind of bottom of my list for multiple reasons. Because I think we can do a lot to transform and build sustainable cultures without facing that immediately. I almost want to be like, let's have bridge makers exist for 6 months before we even
tackle situation
into it, because we have to learn how to communicate over less wicked problems. Maybe just like
I think one of the major issues around like that area is that a lot of, especially because VR itself became very popular during a time where a ton of people were stuck inside and these children weren't able to access that third. I'm not sure how familiar you are with the idea of the third place, which is a lot of like research going into like why does a lot of like children online and why they do spend a lot of time online.
Yeah.
It also, you can also look at it of like why so many adults spend a lot of time in VR, and it ties into the idea of they're looking for a space that they had lost during a really prominent time in our history, which is we have nowhere to go except work or home, so we come online.
That's it. Yeah, and exactly. I think COVID threw us into a whole other level of wicked problem around children, virtual reality, and safe social spaces and what that means. But I don't think that we're going to solve anything like nuclear bomb level here. But
Never.
I do
Not
think
anytime
that
soon.
we can grow a language as a community that is employing principles of transformative justice, including making, eventually, especially if there are specific incidences that come out into the media or whatever, that we might even collectively write a letter to the social apps or policymakers on requests from community leaders of how we need support. So there are ways to organize and amplify messaging to the powers that are making decisions about the invisible parts of our environments and how we connect with each other, that Bridgemakers has potential to organize and build those messages. So
foundations. Yeah,
the foundations of practicing the community of the future, where kids will probably be more integrated into many spaces. But how do we get there? And do we all just have to wait for the technology to solve it? Maybe that's the answer, but have we really looked at all the options, especially together? Because mostly, I don't know about all of you, I'm pretty sure you all resonate with this. When children are around and I hear that shrill voice and that like manic chatter, just my whole body freezes up and I just want to be like, it's like a brain virus. I want them to go away. But
I've had experiences around like older teenagers in communities I've been a part of, and I think it also depends on the environment, because if you go into like say some public lobbies where they've seen like they're like a lot of children look at stuff like TikTok and they see the people trolling and they go into the world and they think that's acceptable behavior. It's because that is sort of like what they've been taught. whereas other older teenagers and stuff from communities I've been a part of act in a very different way. So I think it depends as well what communities you're around, what environment you're around, and sort of like why they're coming into that space.
Yeah. And so this, I appreciate that you're all like, okay, hey, you, Ruth, children are at the bottom of the list. Let's talk about children. I think this is our instinct, right? Which is to go towards the thing that maybe feels like the hardest to solve.
It's one of the big discussions.
Yeah.
It's one of the biggest ones at the moment.
And so we can definitely put a poll up, and if everybody is voting that this be a topic we talk about more, I think I need a lot more prep for this. So even if everyone was like, let's do it next week.
From my experience so far, sorry to interrupt, you will need a lot more research and community engagement for that to go anywhere.
Yeah, exactly.
Because UMod, we're in adult only worlds as well as 13 plus worlds. It's doesn't matter where you are. It's a very
prominent issue.
Yeah,
I won't say it's not a prominent issue in regards to that. It's just everything or everyone I've interacted with so far, no matter what world you are in, it is just go out straight and attack that underage person just because they're underage.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And again,
there's no going up to them. So, hey, sorry, you shouldn't be here. This is not an area or whatever. It is just, yo, kid, there's a portal here. Go through it, and they'll send them to some very nice place.
Yeah, trolling children. And I've seen that a lot. I've seen that from parents. I've seen that from community leaders. I've seen it on occasion from off-duty developers even that are in their own apps that are just going after kids. So I think that there's a knee-jerk response inside of all of us, including me, that just has this very low threshold of tolerance for that and a fear of being seen as having tolerance for that. And so there's so many layers to this. So what I'm going to invite is, I'll be putting a poll up for this next week's meetup again on some of these harder topics. And I would invite us to practice healthy conflicting on topics that are more solvable or more applicable to helping us learn how to conflict and collaborate together. And we will keep this one on a back burner, and maybe we'll create a forum that allows us to really just start to gather even articles and resources and policies and throw them all into the same place. So it has a place to go. It's just not going to be the top of our discussion right now. So that being said, we've got 3 minutes left for any meeting. Usually this is the time where we offer appreciation to each other or to your brilliant host that has rolled with the technology punches and is doing this all out of the goodness of her heart. But yeah, however we want to close up our time here, I welcome any final thoughts or comments.
I
mean, on the original, on the subject that we were talking about, it's literally just as easy as VR chat getting off their ass and actually doing their job.
I hear you.
Because
this is where we've got to think about the community debt piece and what our goals are, right? Because it does feel a lot of times like looking up in the sky that people aren't paying attention and aren't listening. And there's a lot of evidence where requests have been made and things have not changed, and they maybe have gone the opposite way. So I hear your frustration there deeply. And I want to invite that we have audiences here of not just the community members and leaders. We also have community managers that will watch this video, that will be a part of this. And we get to practice the idea that even though we can't see behind the scenes, these are all people who really want to do the right thing and are trying to figure out ways to do that. And we get to experiment with ways to incentivize those things that we need. So, thank you for bringing that frustration here. I think anybody who has been around or knows any of my story, I hope you believe me when I can tell you I have been through a lot of wounding from the structures and how they are unresponsive at times for the needs of the community leaders. So thank you for bringing that. It's important that that tone of anger be here. And I want to really come in gently but clearly here and say, let's find ways to turn that anger into requests for change and join our voices together in that and see if that helps. Because a lot of times what happens for community leaders or community managers and applications is they get a lot of individual requests, but they don't ever hear from a collective group of leaders that are saying this is what we need. And so just keep that in mind. This is different. And it doesn't mean that it's going to change VR chat specifically, but it might influence other apps that are growing or already exist. And so we can still help the cumulative effort of building better communities. And thank you for letting me cut you off there. I think for the nature of our time, I want to make sure that we're ending this with authenticity and also compassion. So grateful you're here, and keep bringing that frustration and anger. We need that reality check, and we also have to figure out how to catalyze that into something functional so that we can build a better structure. So for all of that, my request is if you have gratitude or excitement or curiosity, click on the helper roles that you see there in the chat and sign up to be a helper. It's a 3-month invitation, and you can propose your own way that you want to help if you don't see something that you fit in those roles. But this is a way that we become bridge makers and not hey you bridge. Because ultimately, like, you will be the sign if this is a community that's growing each other together and turning from conversation into construction. So that is the final word. Okay, so events for this week, just to recap, is going to be Human on Purpose, Tuesdays and Thursdays from 7 to 9 p.m. Pacific time. And then we cover one uncomfortable emotion per week, so you can always upgrade your emotional fluency. And then Friday night is our leadership meetup. Eventually, over the next few months, I'm going to ask multiple leaders who are coming regularly to start taking pieces of that. So my goal for the community leadership meetup is to be able to step away from that within the next few months, and that you are all running that together. That is not a, hey, you talks the whole time. This is a, we learn how to facilitate hard conversations and then have a fun and interesting world hop to give ourselves a dessert after a hard conversation. But we're going to be practicing conflict resiliency there. And then finally, we have our once a month roundtable summit. Okay, so good beginnings of conversations here. Again, the report will come out next week. If you do sign up to be a helper, you are eligible for a customized report if you filled out the survey. And otherwise, thank you.
Amen. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye, everyone. Thank you. Bye. Bye-bye. Thank you. Bye. Sorry again.
Oh, no. Grateful to all of you.